God bless. We're going to continue into session 13, I think.
Yes, 13.
Yeah, and we were looking at what the scriptures say, what Jesus said about adultery and that subject. We were in Matthew chapter 19. If you want to go back to that, that would be wonderful. And it's, 19 what? 19:3 is where the Pharisees came to him asking if it was lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason. And the reason, the issue that is being discussed here is something that was active in their time. There was a debate going on as to what was the right thing to do with divorce. The question that we look back in Matthew 5 was, whoever sends his wife away, let him give her a certificate of divorce. And that was a quotation from Matthew 24, verses 1 through 4. Pardon me? Deuteronomy, thank you. Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. And they really took that out of context. But then, as we've looked at Matthew 19, we should interpret the shorter part in Matthew 5 in light of the longer. Remember, a lot of what Jesus is teaching was to confront the wrong doctrine that was propounded by the religious leaders in his time. And according to the Jewish historian Josephus, there was a controversy about divorce between two rival rabbinical schools. The Rabbi Shammai had a rigorous line. He was very legalistic about it. And Rabbi Hillel with a more laxed view. They were questioning Jesus. Basically, the question was to get him, what side are you on? So the one side was very rigid. The only time ever that you can get divorced is in the issue of adultery. And then this other guy, his attitude was, well, if your wife burns the toast, you can kick her out the door. You know, very, very liberal attitude towards the subject of divorce. Of course, Jesus, as his manner was, didn't really answer their question directly, but gave the right perspective on stuff. And again, in Matthew 19 in verse 4, Jesus answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. They are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. And he's quoting from Genesis, and I have this up on the screen, these records in Genesis. So instead of getting caught in their web of deceit, he goes back, because they're saying Moses said you can get divorced. Well, what do you say about it? He said, well, that was really never God's plan, divorce. He brings them back to God's original plan, which is set forth in Genesis. Where he said God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, to the male and the female, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and rule over the fish of the sea and so on. And then in chapter 2, verse 24, for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. This is what Jesus was quoting from. And again, in verse 4 of chapter 19, in the beginning, he made them male and female. Marriage was never, ever considered for people of the same sex, that a man would marry a man or a woman would marry a woman. It has always been God's original intent that a male and a female would marry each other. So, Jesus' response was very enlightening because it brings you back to God's original plan. The Pharisees called Moses' provision for divorce a command, and Jesus basically referenced it as being a concession. Because of the hardness of your hearts, that was why the bill of divorce was available. But God's original plan was that there would be no separation. And again, they're quoting from Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. I'll leave you to look that up yourself, but it's taking the verse out of context to confront Jesus on a subject that verse is not really talking about. What the verse is talking about in Deuteronomy is that if someone gets married and then they get divorced, and then they get divorced and then they get married again, and then they get divorced from the second person, they can't go back and marry the first person over again. That's what the subject matter is about. It's really got nothing to, they're really taking something out of context. So in other words, if you get married to someone and you get divorced from them, and then you remarry somebody else, and then you get divorced from them, you can't go back to the first person you married and live with them. Okay, that's really what the subject is in Deuteronomy 24, and I'm not getting into that subject right now. So it was an inappropriate in regard to their conclusion and their question. They took divorce very lightly. Jesus took it very seriously. He allowed only one provision, and that would be adultery. He emphatically endorsed the permanency of marriage with people who are not our spouses. We have already seen that we're being instructed to reconcile, to have peace with people. How much more so with the spouse? That we went through all of this stuff about not calling a person a fool, not calling them a good for nothing, not being angry, and then, dealing with things quickly, so that, and if your right hand offends you, or your eye, or your foot, you get rid of it. He's already talked to us in great detail about what to do to reconcile with people who are not spouses to us. How much more so to our spouse? And then he follows this with loving your enemies. So indeed, in Jesus' mind, divorce was not a subject that was to be talked about. It was, we work it out and we make it happen. Other than for the sake of adultery. And the reason that that's such a major issue is because adultery breaks the commitment at its core. And you've committed yourself to have a sexual relationship with one person and one person only. And when you break that, you've broken the covenant that was intended by it. And more depth to it. Now, it's very easy to take what Jesus said here and then just run with it and say to people, no matter what, you don't get divorced unless there's an adultery situation. However, when you go to 1 Corinthians, this subject is talked about again, and there's more insight given. Where if your spouse doesn't allow you to worship God, they forbid you from worshiping God, they won't allow you to do so, then under those grounds you can get divorced. I mean, we don't want to be extremists with what Jesus is teaching. And, does Jesus expect for a spouse to say with her husband when he's beating the hell out of her every day? I don't, come on now, let's think. So it's not a black and white type of thing. Adultery, Jesus said but he's not closed-minded to keep people in a situation where their life is being threatened and so on. So it requires a great deal of wisdom and insight with the overall scope of God's Word, the love that God communicates, the endeavors to reconcile that are so frequently spoken of in the Sermon on the Mount. God is a God about reconciliation. Jesus came to bring reconciliation between God and man. And Jesus is talking about so much in this sermon here about reconciliation with other humans. And, we are to do all of this. And that's Jesus' response is permanency and so on. So now let's go to Matthew chapter 5 again, please. I started that whole subject on with the divorce by saying to you that it's a complicated subject and not an easy to deal with one. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, It says, again, you have heard the ancients were told. And a lot of these things that, in the previous sessions I talked about, you have heard that the ancients were told. It doesn't say it is written this way and that you should follow it. You have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but you shall fulfill your vows to Yahweh. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your statement be yes, yes, and no, no. Anything else is evil. Again, in their culture, apparently, they were making oaths and swearing to heaven. They were swearing on the throne of God. They were swearing on earth, and so on, and the city of Jerusalem. We would today say, I swear to you on a stack of Bibles. I swear to you I swear to God that I'm telling you the truth. I swear on heaven. I swear on my mother's grave. I never really understood that one, but, I don't understand any of them, where he's saying, don't do that. Instead, here's an idea. Mean what you say and say what you mean. The reason for all of this swearing stuff in their culture and the oaths in their culture was because they weren't honest. They didn't have integrity in their speech. And it's the same thing today. It should be that when someone enters an agreement with you or a contract with you, that their word should be good enough. But it isn't. I swear to God I'm going to do this. I swear to God. I put my hand on the Bible. I wouldn't lie to you. Well, why are you saying that? Because you're a liar. You're trying to prove to me you're not. If you weren't concerned about me not believing you. And so Jesus is saying, have much more integrity than that, so that it's not an issue in dealing with people. Look at this. These verses that talk about this subject about swearing and oaths. In Exodus 20, verse 7 on the screen, you shall not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain. I swear to God. For Yahweh will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Leviticus 19:12, you shall not swear falsely by my name, so as to profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. Numbers 30, verse 2, if a man makes a vow to Yahweh or takes an oath to bind himself with a binding obligation, he shall not violate his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Then in Deuteronomy 23, 21 through 22, when you make a vow to Yahweh, your God, you shall not delay to pay it, for it would be sin if you do. And Yahweh your God will surely require it of you. However, if you refrain from vowing, it would not be sin in you. It's not really wise to make vows to God. It's just not. Because for a number of reasons. Well, we should look at James. James talks about this a little bit. James, well, I got Matthew 23, verses 16 through 22. You can look at that too, but let's go to James chapter 5. As I've said before, James is very similar in content to the Sermon on the Mount. 5:12, but of all, my brethren, do not swear, neither by heaven or by earth, or with any other oath. But your yes is to be yes, and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment. And again, I think it's the book of Ecclesiastes talks about this subject quite a bit. And making oaths to God is not wise. It's just better for you to do what you're supposed to do, to say what you're supposed to say, and to mean what you say and say what you mean. Because you don't know the future. If you make a vow to God that you're going to do this and you're going to do that, you don't know what's going to happen in the future that can prevent you from doing this or doing that. It's just better to live one day at a time and to be obedient to the things of God and not swear to God. And swearing to other people in the name of God is really putting you in a situation of taking the Lord's name in vain, which you certainly don't want to do. Just speak truth. Didn't we read that last night in Ephesians chapter 4? Speak truth one to another. Don't lie, speak truth one to another. That would be very advantageous for all. Back to Matthew chapter 5. Verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist evil. But I say to you, do not resist evil. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. The Old Testament quote here refers to the law of retaliation. It's also called commensurate retribution. And this aspect, we talked a little bit about this in a previous session, but this aspect of the Mosaic law is basically referring to the judges and how they're supposed to implement the judicial laws to keep the people, just and so on. This is not at all talking about personal retaliation or personal revenge. The Pharisees turned this into unjust personal retaliation. They quoted this, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and they were now using it so that they, if somebody did something bad to them, they could do it back to them in kind. You can look at Exodus 21, verses 23 through 25, and Leviticus 24, 17 through 23, and you'll see it says there, it does talk about this law of retaliation, this commensurate retribution, so that, and as it says, life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a bruise for a bruise, a fracture for a fracture. And that is the judicial system that God put before the judges to use in dealing with governing Israel. Now, in Deuteronomy, again on the screen, Deuteronomy 13:11, the reason for this just retaliation is that all of Israel will hear and thus will never again do such a wicked thing among you. If you understand that cutting someone's hands off is going to mean your hand's going to be cut off, that gets out, and then there ain't going to be nobody cutting hands off. And in 17:13, then all the people will hear and be afraid and will not act presumptuously again. In 19:20 and 21, the rest will hear and be afraid and will never again do such an evil thing among you. Thus you shall not show pity. Life for a life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, and foot for a foot. And then in 21:21, then all of the men of the city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst. And all of Israel will hear of it and be afraid. This type of judicial system that was set up in a theocracy with Israel had a twofold purpose, at least twofold, maybe more that I'm not aware of. But the first one was it would help people to live justly. They would understand that if they did wrong, there would be an equal consequence for the wrong that they did. And this would prevent people from doing that wrong. So that if you heard about this, then you wouldn't do it. And then the second thing was it prevented people, or it deterred people from taking personal vengeance on someone that has done wrong. They understood that the judicial system would be just in punishing the person, that it would be equal to the crime that they committed. The punishment would be equal to it. Now, we in our country have implemented this, obviously not in the same complete fashion, but the idea of our judicial system was that there would be a penalty that was equal to the crime that was committed. However, it's kind of ironic in the time in which I'm teaching this in 2024, it's not 19. That, our society, our judicial system has gone into chaos because of very liberal, foolish actions that have caused a great deal of crime to surface in our society. Here, we live in the state of New York, and this is I can give you some personal testimony, is that I have visited a number of people in Albany County Jail. Albany County Jail is primarily a jail that people were held over until they went to court. They couldn't get bail. They stayed in the county jail, and then when their court case would come up, they would go. And then also in Albany County Jail is short sentences. You can be there for a year. Anything over that, you would go to the state penitentiary. So I dealt with people who were waiting in jail because they couldn't afford bail, and they would wait for their trial to come up. And I worked with one man in particular who was there for an entire year, and he wasn't convicted of any crime as of yet because he hadn't gone to trial. So what the government here in New York State did to rectify that problem, understanding that there was a problem, because that's not really just, right? He hasn't been convicted of anything. So what they decided to do was that no matter what the crime, that there would be no bail and that you don't have to go to jail. So now that's the extreme response to the problem that was at hand. So now our fellowship, we know of someone that was arrested 3 times within 3 months for the same crime, and we were victimized by that individual because he wasn't put in jail. He committed assault, and then he got freed immediately, no bail. He did it again a month later and got out of jail the next day. And then he did it to me and to some of us at my house. I talked to the police officer about this. I said, "Why do you keep on letting them out?" He says, "Our hands are tied. We have no choice. We have nothing to do with this. This is what the DA does." So you see that there isn't a just response for the crimes that are being committed. I'm not saying I know how to do this. I'm just saying that being extreme is not the answer to the problems at hand. Being extreme to defund the police so that we don't have bad cops doing bad things, that didn't make much sense. Now crime runs rampant in our society. So the fundamental principle that Jesus set up with Israel was, for whatever your crime is, you suffer the consequences that are commensurate with that crime. It's just retaliation. Now, I would not want to be the individual that has to figure that out. I don't want to be the judge that has to sit on the stand to make those decisions. But that's the principle of what we're talking about. And again, these guys are taking it out of context. Where is this in Matthew 5? What? 38. Let's read it again. "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. For whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also." Well, so Jesus said, well, there's the way it's supposed to work, but here's what I'm saying to you, that if somebody smacks you on the cheek, then you turn your other cheek and let them smack you there. This is not talking about somebody punching you in the face with all of their might, giving you, it's talking about somebody insulting you. If somebody insults you, don't let it get you into the place of insulting them back. It says, resist not evil. You would think it would say, resist evil. It doesn't say that. It says resist not evil. So when evil comes at you, don't resist it with evil from you. Because the normal tendency is, if somebody insults you, is to turn around and insult them back. So they're pulling you into their evil. Resist not evil. You get the point? And but I say to you, do not resist an evil person, but whosoever slaps you on the right cheek, don't let it get to you. Turn to him the other also. If someone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Now, this is not talking about someone's trying to steal your house from you, or steal your car from you, or wipe out your bank account. It's talking about somebody stealing your coat. It's an insignificant matter. It's not a overwhelming matter. Then the other issue is, if someone forces you to go a mile, go with him too. This is referring to the Roman occupation in their time. The soldiers were compelling the people of Israel to carry their stuff for them. The law was that the soldier could make you carry their stuff for a mile. Now you can imagine the temptation that would be to be resentful and bitter. You want me to carry your stuff for a mile? And you know that would cause a person to respond in a very unpleasant way. And Jesus is saying, let it go. Instead of getting uptight about it, just go ahead and go 2 miles with them. Don't let it get to you. Don't let the evil of the world pull you into being evil. You know, there's been laws that have been passed in our country in my lifetime, in our state, that I don't agree with. And my tendency has been at first to resist it, to not do it. But the law says, you don't have to smile, Mimi. There's no reason for that. So, but I have to come around and do it. Rather than losing my mind and getting pulled into having a bitter attitude and having a holy heart be soured into being an unholy heart. Let go of these insignificant matters. Now, there are those who tend towards extremism with everything in life. Everything that Jesus said, you know, like the rabbis were doing with the divorce, you know, no circumstance other than adultery, you know, and so on. And I have known, and some of you have known this person too, that read this and interpreted is that they're a pacifist. If somebody smacks me on the cheek or punches me or beats the hell out of me, I will not fight back. But the very way in which we are made, the autonomic nervous system is, you know, if somebody throws a punch at you, you have no choice but your body automatically defends yourself. If somebody throws something at your eye automatically closes. It's an automatic response to defend yourself. And I don't think that God put that in us so that we could let people just run all over us. That is not the example that Jesus Christ gave to us. The example that Jesus gave to us is that when people came at him with evil, when they insulted him, and boy, they insulted him a lot, he did not allow them to pull him into their ugly way of life. He responded to them. He was not a doormat. He stood up to them. He spoke truth to them. He didn't let them push him around, but he did not respond to evil with evil. He did not resist their evil. He just said, okay, this is the truth. And he did this over and over and over and over again. I thought about looking this up. How many times did the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and lawyers come up to him, baiting him and speaking evil to him, and never once did he allow their evil to make him evil? That's what Jesus is communicating to us. This pacifist that I know, he literally taught people, I don't know if he did it here in the church or not, but I heard him teach it, that if somebody came into my house and raped my wife, I would not hurt this man. I would not stop this man. And I felt like punching him when he said that. I mean, that is so contrary to common sense. It's so contrary to, this is not at all, Jesus isn't expecting us to do that. Not at all. Read the Bible. Read the whole Bible. And don't. And, so you know what I said to him? I'll never allow my family to be in your jurisdiction, or to you to have any authority over them. Because I know one thing for sure, you're not man enough to stand up and protect them if something violent was coming their way. Where I would run in the way and I would protect them at all costs. Nobody's going to do that to my wife and still be alive and allow it to happen. That ain't going to happen. So that's extremism. And that is that pharisaical mindset of taking everything to an extreme. And that's not what God wants. If somebody wants to steal all of your money, of course you would stand up for that. You wouldn't turn the other cheek and say, oh, okay, take all my money. That's ridiculous. But if you want my coat, you want my shirt, I'm not going to get all bent. I'm not going to court with you over that. Hey, I'll give you my coat too. You obviously need it. Rather than getting all pulled into the evil this is how we avoid being evil in an evil world. This is what Jesus is teaching us. How brilliant it is what he puts before us. Again, we are different. We have these radical teachings of Jesus. Just tremendous. Now where are we? Oh, they want to sue you. We did that, right? Verse 43. We didn't do 42. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. You have heard, it's the same principle. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Okay, now we're really getting radical, right? You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Notice that the quote, the capitalized letters, you should love your neighbor and hate the love your neighbor is in capital letters and hate your enemy is not. Because it is written in the Old Testament that you should love your neighbor. It's not written anywhere in the Old Testament or that you should hate your enemy. That's what they were saying. That is not what was written. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now this is again radical. So that you may be the sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? The tax collectors were considered the worst in their society. If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore, you are to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. The things that Jesus sets before us, it helps us to be like Teflon is supposed to be. When you have a frying pan and it has Teflon on it, you cook the egg on it, you can flip it without, you don't need to put oil or butter on it. It's supposed to not stick. So that the evil of this world doesn't stick to us, he's given us all of these principles. These principles are the Beatitudes in manifestation. This is what the Beatitudes put before us, how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be peacemakers. We're supposed to be people of mercy. We're supposed to be people with pure hearts. We're supposed to be people who, when we're persecuted, we rejoice and have joy. And when these are our attitudes, then this stuff, when it comes at us, doesn't impact us. And, this is how you live, like I said earlier, a right way, a righteous life in a very evil world. And it is an evil world. And if you think it's not, and you think that people that don't have Christ in their life aren't evil, then you're not reading the Bible. Everybody is born dead in trespasses and sins. And that don't go away until you accept Christ as your Lord. People they live according to the lust of the flesh and the desires of the flesh and the mind. So we have to learn these things that Jesus puts forth so that we don't get pulled into it. And he's saying to us now, love our enemies. And again, as I said, the religious leaders were saying, hate your enemies. That's never been God's intent. If we are to be salt of the earth and light of the world, we have to learn to love. And you know, the bottom line is we can't love our enemies based on their behavior. Do we bless them who curse us because of their words? Is the good that we give to those who hate us going to be drawn out of us by them? The answer to those questions is no, absolutely not. Our motivation for loving our enemies, praying for our enemies, is because of the love that God has for us, that our Father has for us, and the love that we have for each other. We can love our enemies not because our enemies deserve to be loved. We love our enemies because God loves us, and He wants us to be like Him. He loves everybody. So we are to do the same. And great principles of truth to live according to the righteous standards that Jesus has set forth for us. So, Father, I thank you so much for all of these wonderful things that are in your word. And I ask that you would help us to understand it. And most of all, Father, that you would help us to live the way that you've had Jesus put down here for us. I thank you for giving us the Spirit that enables us to live a holy and a godly life. I thank you, Father, for having Christ alive inside us so that we can be like He was when He was here on earth. I thank you for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. I included an article in your notes that I wrote on a lot of this subject matter. I thought that would, at your leisure, you could read. It will give you similar thoughts to what we've covered in this session.